This screencast is designed to assist students at my school, John Lyons School in London, studying for the Edexcel IGCSE English Literature. The coursework itself is a piece of coursework which requires 6 poems to be studied. For that reason, we call it the Beast. 3 of the poems must be major poems and 3 subsidiary poems. And all this brought in with a word count of between around 1800 to maybe 2100, 2200 at the most. Edexcel are actually quite clear that there is no prescribed word count, but in their specifications they actually are suggesting really quite a low word count of around 15 to 1800. I think that better students will do better for writing a little bit more. But the first thing that needs to be said at this point is this. The difference between the major and the subsidiary poems must be clear in the essay that's written, and that therefore the 3 majors, in terms of the essay being worked on this year at John Lyon, Sonnet 116, Remember, and Mother in a Refugee Camp, must be noticeably longer than for the other 3 poems, and also structured in such a way that the question focuses on these 3, with the other 3 adding interest and adding colour and contrast perhaps to the comments being made on the major poems. Now, the boys writing this essay, which is looking at the presentation of love across the 6 poems, are receiving this information in the form of a talk, one lunchtime, and then the PowerPoint and this YouTube video are being made available on the department YouTube channel and on my blog, www.jwpblog.wordpress.com. And so it is addressed in second person, and it's a PowerPoint designed to pick up the common errors found at the first draft stage. The first thing I'm saying here is that examiners, moderators want to give high marks to anything that's in front of them. With this in mind, help them. You are preparing an essay using Microsoft Word 99.9% of the time. So turn on your spell check and use it. And if you get that little wiggly red line, bother to go back and see why it's doing it. Same is true of grammar check if you get the wiggly green line. Go back and see what it's saying and see if you can correct it. All of this is, I would have thought, common sense, though it's surprising how many essays are riddled with basic spelling mistakes, and the most common of which tend to be homophones. So proofread anyway. If you are somebody who will get your there and there the wrong way round, make a note of it and go back and check for it specifically. Too many essays lose their impact because they are poorly written at the simplest stage, the basic spelling mistake. Likewise, some really basic grammar errors that we're seeing. We all know, and we have known probably since the age of about 6, that proper nouns start with capital letters. The names of poems are proper nouns, therefore use a capital, and for real clarity in an essay, underline them wherever you use the title. It's particularly important in a poem like Rossetti's Remember. In a sentence not unlike the one that I've started here, in Remember, the imperative remember is used when the persona seems to need her partner to remember her. In the space of a sentence, we've used remember 3 times, and each time it has a different form. Help the examiners read your essay and get the message you want to put across by taking a little bit more time over the clarity of your writing. Likewise, I mentioned earlier putting on spell check, but let's think about other typical SPaG errors that we see too often. The might of, might have split. It's very straightforward. Might of is wrong. Learn it, get over it. Even if you don't want to spend time thinking about the grammatical explanation of the fact that it's a verb and that the word of actually has no meaning whatsoever in the context of a phrase like might of or could of. Even if that doesn't interest you, just learn it and check for it. Always keep your eyes open for number. Your noun-verb agreement, one of those key features of all the MFL that you're studying. As seen, for example, in this, which is a quotation like the others lifted from essays that I've just marked first drafts of. The message of the two stanzas are, here the student has allowed the fact that they're writing about two stanzas to trick them into thinking that the subject of the sentence, the message, is also plural. It's careless and it needs to be caught. I've already spoken about spellings. It will come up again and again as I go through this, but nothing says I don't care, like common misspellings, or spelling the same word differently 2 or 3 times, particularly if it's the name of a poet. Remember to punctuate. Even at this stage, there are still people who are forgetting to put the full stop at the end of a paragraph, or in the quotation from a poem are miscopying what is there. So with those in our mind, I just want to be a little bit more specific for a little while here and just talk briefly about content and style. First of all, answer the question. The question asks you to consider the treatment of love, the presentation of love across 6 poems. That, therefore, must be what every paragraph is focused upon. This means you have to plan, because if you don't, you will end up simply writing analysis of the poem for no purpose whatsoever other than the fact that you're showing off that you have some knowledge. Some of you will have seen me talking about Lego knowledge metaphors, little Lego bricks for each piece of knowledge. And it does no harm to keep this in your mind. You're aware that you have an amount of knowledge about every poem. If you imagine each tiny piece of knowledge that you have is a piece of Lego, and you go back to when you were a small child and you might have thrown your Lego out over the floor with a despairing wail of a parent in the background, so that you then had to choose which pieces you wanted to use to build the particular thing you were building. An essay is exactly the same. Some of your knowledge about these poems will be discarded. Other bits of your knowledge will be highly important, but what it means above all is that you have to plan. I use a flowchart. You don't have to, but I always use a flowchart when I'm planning a long piece of work. And in this flowchart, which I'll let you read, arg 1, 2, 3 over to the left-hand side refers to argument, the technical term for each section of the essay. And you can see that on the right-hand side, what I've tried to do is set out in a really basic level which poem I'm discussing in which order, and what maybe the key ideas relating to that poem are going to be in each section. Take a moment to look at this, and then take a moment to think about whether you did plan in this way. Certainly, every child I taught was encouraged to make a plan like this. I often call them a skeleton plan, to give us the bare bones of the essay. If you didn't do it, between your first draft and your final draft, you need to do it. When you've done it, you can then begin to think about whether it tells the story you wish. This is another very wordy slide, and I'll let you read it. I'm not going to read it all out. But what I often do at this stage is write a very short version of my essay, maybe 2 or 3 sentences at most for each of the sections, in order to see if my ideas do actually link and flow. Again, I'll let you read this, and you should be able to see how I move between each poem with a purpose in mind, based upon the content and the title of the essay I am writing. Pause now and read it, and then come back to it. So, if you're now coming back to me, Let's have a look at what we might need as we take our essay forward. We obviously want to get the highest grades, and before you all tell me it's a misprint, I've used the bad pun ad astar as opposed to ad astra very regularly for the idea of leading towards A-star work. It's very clear that the marking strand to do with the content of the poems requires you to work with language, structure, and form. Most students are very good at working with language, less good at structure and form. And you've got to actually make it work for you. Now, I deliberately picked in the 6 poems 2 sonnets and a villanelle, apart from a nice long free verse poem and then 2 other poems with 3 sonnets and a villanelle even, with recognisable structures and form. And for example, here you are, your short paragraph about Do Not Go Gentle is a villanelle which helps show love in a positive way. Now, I've read that in an essay this time, and that phrase, sentence in that way, gains nothing. You have said, if that is what you wrote, absolutely nothing to show me that you have any idea why the fact that this poem is a villanelle is helpful. Consequently, when I'm marking it, I might acknowledge that you know the technical term for Thomas's poem, but I'm not going to give you great credit for what is obviously an act of memorization trotted out without trying to engage with any of the reasons that this is the case. If you want to engage with structure, and you should if you wish to get a high mark, then try to engage with it. And I've written a paragraph here which therefore you can't plagiarize, but you can look at. And it says this: Do Not Go Gentle is a villanelle which causes the repetition of the opening lines throughout the poem. So we've picked up the fact that one of the aspects of the villanelle is this repetition of the first and second line then throughout the whole poem. The stanzas are 3 lines long until the last stanza. The addition of a 4th line to give the requisite 19-line structure, again, it's maths, it's the structure of villanelle, you're confident in writing about it, ensures that the poem ends on the positive imperative, rage, rage, rather than with the negative, do not go gentle. Ultimately, the message received is positive, demanding that one continues to fight against death for as long as is possible. What I've tried to show is how you can write about structure and make it do a job for you. In the sonnets, you can write about structure, I think, very easily, simply by remembering that between the octave and the sestet comes the volta, and the volta is the shift. In a poem like Remember, that shift is a clear moment where Christina Rossetti changes from this, to me, slightly desperate begging to be remembered, to a much more generous realization that actually a higher form of love is to say, but actually if it causes you pain, then let the love slip away. Which of course is the message of Sonnet 71. Let the structure work for you. Now, when you are writing in this way, I've skipped a passage here, I want you to remember to link your ideas together. It's really important that your paragraphs do link together, and you can do this using what I call a Janus sentence. You will find posts relating to Janus sentences on my blog. And the idea is that you link in both directions. And for me, you write a paragraph and you link at the start of the new paragraph. What I mean by looking in both directions is this, and I've given you an example here from me. Whereas in Sonnet 116, Shakespeare suggests that love is permanent, i.e. looking back at the material you've just written, in Sonnet 71, he had suggested a different message, looking forward to a new element that you are then going to explore in what follows, presumably linking 71 to the poem Remember. Now at this point, there's a couple of short things that I want to just discuss, and I've got 2 slides called Smalls. These are a relatively quick fire list of the things that make me really frustrated when I'm marking your essays because of the lack of perhaps clarity or academic tone that begins to develop. First of all, get rid of writing in the second person. Analysis should be objective, should therefore be written in the third person. One feels, the reader might feel, and so on. You can, however, in an essay such as this, bring in personal opinion, but when you do, it should be in the first person. The next thing you should do is remove lazy phraseology. In this poem, it says. What says? It doesn't say anything. The poet has spent hours puzzling over the right group of words to create an effect. So focus now should be on what the poet wrote. Likewise, don't write in the passive voice. It just adds words and creates convoluted phrasing, such as this. It is also touched upon that love is finite. How about Shakespeare suggests that love is finite? Be clear and be direct. If you're not sure, read your essay aloud. See if it does make sense. This again is a direct quotation from an essay that I've marked this term. Marriage of true mind, misquoted, is the union of ideas of what love is and is the conventional idea of marriage. It is the play on the word marriage to bring together the idea of the coming together of different ideas and the coming together of two people in love. That's a direct quotation, and frankly, I have absolutely no idea what it means. I doubt if the author of that passage has any idea what he was trying to write when he sees that. Take the time, read your essays aloud. Do they make sense? And as far as I'm concerned, a passage such as that in a final copy of the essay is a clear suggestion that you haven't proofread and that you haven't taken the requisite care that this essay, which is 40% of your entire English Literature GCSE, requires. Get rid of the errors before the errors cost you marks. Finally, to go back over and to pick up one or two new ones of the really basic mistakes. Poor academic style. We address poets when we're writing by their surname. None of them are personal friends, and even if they were, they're not personal friends of the reader. Therefore, we're not trying to show off how well we know them. We get rid of Christina says. Rossetti writes. Thomas writes. Next one I want to get rid of, in line 4, it says. I mentioned this about 3 minutes ago. Credit the poet and gain marks for the awareness of authorial intention. The next one to perhaps think about is the overuse of generalizations. The writing such as this. There is a lot of, whatever it might be, metaphor, simile, whatever, near the beginning of the poem, or creates an effect on the reader. Try and be precise. Why write near the beginning of the poem when you could write at the beginning of the second quatrain of the sonnet, or in line 3 there becomes, and you just might get some credit for writing about structure. Creates an effect on the reader is anathema to me and to all English teachers and examiners. Tell us what the effect is and tell us how it is created. Stop dealing in bland generalization. It will gain you no marks. At the beginning of this talk, I mentioned the failure to use capital letters for proper nouns. Every time. Don't let yourself write a paragraph in which you make assertions about the poem and offer no evidence. All the points you make must have some form of supporting evidence, and if you're reading your poem through and you find a paragraph or two in your essay with no supporting evidence, then you need to go back and rework it. Link all the arguments, or else you're writing in bullet points. And take care over your spellings. That's it for this essay. I hope that's helpful and I hope it's clear. Good luck with the writing, and I look forward to the final copies.